Hi, my name's Jenny Mellado, and this is my persuasive speech. My topic is how standardized testing in Texas has effects on people. And the purpose of this speech is to persuade my class that standardized testing in schools is a problem because the focus moves away from learning and it takes away the need to pay attention to struggles that children may have. Standardized texting in Texas has become a primary focus in scoring and evaluating a school's overall performance. But this can cause punitive consequences towards funding for education. And not only that, but it creates a suffrage for children and educators in total. And I will explain why. So, growing up, school was usually pretty fun. Me and my classmates enjoyed it a lot. Yet, when the TOS test came, that's what it was called back then, from roughly about the 1990s to the year 2002, I believe. It was a very nerve-wracking experience. The emotions switched from fun to fear and anxiety. We all knew that when the testing came around, everything that we had prepared for that one day, it seemed like the learning that we did was just completely thrown out the window because the focus was just on the testing and nothing else. So, fast forward to now, my children are at the age where they're taking another form of standardized testing called State of Texas Assessments of Academic Readiness, also known as the STAR testing. So those parents who have children here in Texas, I'm sure they're familiar with it. Children from grades 3 to high school take the STAR test. And depending on what grade you're in, if you're in advancing from elementary to secondary, then that determines under normal circumstances whether you pass or fail, whether you move on. So from fifth grade, if you don't pass, you move on to, if you don't pass, you do not move on to middle school. Now, given COVID, the situation has changed a bit, but it's still used as a means of trying to measure the students' academics, which, in my opinion, doesn't do so accurately. When I ask my kids how they did in school, what is it that they learned, what did they find interesting, a lot of times they can't really give me a clear answer. They tell me, I don't know. So, as a parent, I find this alarming. So, I start to wonder, what is even the purpose of taking the test? And is it even worth it? So it turns out that this issue is a bipartisan concern here in the state of Texas. In an article titled Texas Hopes to Reform Standardized Testing by Austin news station KXAN, an Austin ISD mother agrees that there should be reforms to the current STAR test. And I quote, she says, "We'll all have to face pressures in our lives. This isn't the place to do so. Especially where, as it currently stands, it reflects poorly on teachers if you don't do well." This comes from Hillary Bracknow in that article. If you're a parent, then you should be concerned how state mandating testing affects your child as well. It puts a lot of children under pressure. I know this from personal experience as someone who took Texas state mandated testing and now experiencing it with my own children. Although it may take a lot of effort, we must put the children and teachers first and get back to the fundamentals of learning. So, in this speech, I would like to persuade all my classmates, especially those who are parents, to rally together with other parents and educators and advocate for reforms in standardized testing here in the state of Texas. by reaching out to your local school districts and the Texas Education Agency, also known as the TEA, who oversees the STAR testing. First, let me explain how STAR testing disassociates from learning while focusing on just results. According to Christopher Brown, who is a professor in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at UT Austin, many schools spend a lot of instructional time preparing students for the STAR testing. This comes from the article from Rhonda Fanning. There's an obsession with standardized testing that holds back creativity and development in the classroom. A retired teacher from the Integrated Learning Academy website comments from his own personal experiences that overemphasizes on testing, eliminating projects and activities that normally allow students to be imaginative. Therefore, teachers are spending less time teaching and less time developing a curriculum based on student creativity while trying to just meet the needs of the Texas standards. Also, STAR testing is used as a measure to evaluate schools' overall scores, which determines the amount of funding. So, in other words, the better the scores, the more funding for the school districts, and even then, it still has to be allocated among schools that are considered recognized as opposed to those that just barely meet the standards. House Bill 4545 and Senate Bill 2094 tie school funding to STAR test score results. The lower the scores, the limited resources to the classroom, as I just stated. These scores are also used to evaluate teachers. So, the better that the teacher does in teaching and the better the scores because of that teaching, the better their salary is. They get more incentives as opposed to a teacher who is really trying to teach them and teach the Texas standards, but the students may not do so well on the scores. They don't get the same benefits, the same incentives as the other teacher did. So this is not fair at all. STAR tests are not an accurate measure of what students have learned, as there's a stress to have a good overall score for state recognition. As noted in the article, 7 Problems with Standardized Testing in American Schools by Integrated Learning Academy, standardized testing does not accurately assess the critical thinking skills of the student taking the test. Therefore, this results to what we call quote-unquote test anxiety. This may be a reason why a student who does overall good in school and has good grades might not do so well on the STAR testing because of the amount of pressure and stress that's put on them. There's a fear of being shamed for a low score. So students feel pressured to do the best that they can, whether that comes from their parents, or from their teachers telling them that, or even the school district. They then feel the need to cheat. The ability to retain the material may be short-lived out of pressure to learn. So again, going back to what I said with my kids, they may have the interest to learn and have a favorite subject, but when trying to recall what they learned, they have no clue because they weren't really retaining that information, because it's all just for a test that comes once every semester, depending on their grade. So there have been recent concern on how accurate the STAR measures comprehension since the return of school in the times of COVID-19. Now, mind you, kids were out for a good portion of time. Schools were shut down because of COVID-19. And even in the slow return back to school up until now, things have changed. The curriculum is a little different, but the fear of learning under pressure is now 10 times more because they have other things on their minds, like trying not to get COVID. More so, Senate Bill 2400, as described in Amy Bach's article, raises concerns about whether the STAR is grade level appropriate. House Bill 736 was introduced to repeal the STAR testing, yet this and the Senate Bill 2400 did not pass. So to this day, legislation continues to try to pass a bill and put pressure on the issue of STAR testing given the current stress of COVID-19. Next, we will explore how standardized testing affects kids in psychological ways. Standardized testing affects students emotionally and academically. Given the global COVID-19 pandemic, it has caused disruptions in learning but has made Americans rethink the need for standardized testing. According to Rebecca Kearns in her article, Exams by COVID-19, an opportunity to rethink standardized senior secondary examinations, she states that the suspension of schooling that occurred early in 2020 poses some questions we might ask ourselves, and I quote, "What does the clash between exam-driven schooling and COVID-19 teach us about the purpose of education?" Also in a report by the World Bank, Public Examinations examined a disadvantage of high-stakes exams is that the system may function to reproduce social structures. They do not accurately measure the diverse skills that curricula seem to develop. Meaning, if a certain student comes from a certain demographic, maybe they lived in a more impoverished area than others, then they're not necessarily getting the resources and funding they need to be able to effectively learn. Therefore, how can the STAR test accurately measure their intellect when they never had the resources to begin with to prepare for the STAR test? A statewide assessment places a great burden on students because rather than observing the work that was completed all year long, it's focusing on just that one day. A student may have done so good the whole year, yet everything is thrown out the window when testing day comes around. This is according to 191 News, based out in Austin. The students nor the teacher benefit from the results, while large corporations such as Pearson Education profit off of this because they try to sell more textbooks, resources, training programs, so that people can purchase them since they need to learn. So it's a never-ending cycle. Failing scores can lead to low self-esteem, depression, and overall anxiety. Studies show that standardized testing created stress in young children in particular, creating an emotional toll on elementary-aged children. This is according to a study by Alfie Kahn. In the same study, children were able to recall the answers orally that they might have written down incorrectly. So now let's move on to possible solutions to these issues of STAR testing. Even though these tests have been in place for several years, this doesn't mean that the tradition has to continue. We can make changes, make solutions to the STAR testing, even if that just means reform. If funding is being allocated to different school districts, then the TEA should allow them to select alternative test providers, meaning each school district should be allowed to decide what test is taken for the students depending on their needs. Parents and educators should investigate through the Department of Education what options there are to eliminate the STAR test in place, putting a testing program that fits the developmental areas depending on the child's need. They need the authority to source assessments themselves, not from a provider, says Representative Jason Isaac, who is a Republican from Dripping Springs, Texas, according to the news article from KXAN. Those who are struggling with their academics should be allowed what we call an admission review and dismissal, also known as an ARD, to determine what accommodations and modifications they may need. According to Isaac's House Bill 3. Proposal. The modification would include reducing the number of tests, reducing the weight of star scores in A through F ratings, and another reform is removing the star scores from teachers' evaluations. This allows for the teachers to implement teaching methods for which they feel suits best for the students' needs, and it puts less pressures on teachers. Therefore, it gives everyone a fair shot at an equal and deserved salary, equal pay for everyone. Clearly, being more mindful of children's needs and putting their needs above all is the right measure in effective learning. So, standardized testing will not take that into account. Again, it's only just scores. Clearly, it is safe to say that U.S. schools, Texas in particular, are conforming into a test preparation institutions. Though the STAR test can help in monitoring how a school does overall with academics, there are other factors to consider that are often swept under the rug. I urge you all to be proactive and stay informed on what goes on in your child's learning and what policies the school must follow in accordance with the TEA. So make sure to sign up to their website like I have to stay informed on newsletters that go out pertaining to the STAR testing, especially around this time in March because STAR testing is coming up for students. We all must put forth an effort to make sure that our children are learning and retaining information to the best of their ability, but we have to be vigilant in the challenges and the struggles that come along with it because they themselves may be afraid to speak up. Every child deserves a great education, and the standardized testing seems to put too much pressure on them to learn. It would be great if we could completely do away with STAR testing, but small changes is a good way to start. As the old saying goes, the children are our future, and we have to make sure that we give them the tools so that they can excel not just in school, but whatever path they take in the future. So, who will join me in taking the first steps to change in effective education? Thank you.